Hello everyone. So today we have with us my friend Jeffrey from the Auto Alchemy channel. He is himself an ENTP, a genuine ENTP. And yeah, he's a cool guy, and we're going to be discussing in this video introverted feeling, not only as an INFJ myself, but also as an ENTP in his case, and also be exploring just our own understandings of the function as a whole. So Jeffrey, first up, what's your experience of introverted feeling? I understand that you've went on something of a journey. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's a journey is definitely what it's been. For the longest time, I didn't really understand what people were even referring to by the notion of introverted feeling. I had this very low resolution understanding of the function as being, I've talked about this in one of my videos, but kind of like a caveman grunt of like this bad, this good. And I saw that as being like very superficial and kind of antagonistic towards thinking clearly in the world. So my initial understanding of introverted feeling was not really a favorable one or a fair one. But I've kind of tried to find a way to work my way into that feeling by relating it both to my extroverted feeling and accessing it through that, and then also my introverted thinking. And I know that you have certain you have a model for like how these functional access patterns go. So maybe I can learn even more here today. But
I hope so.
Yeah. Do you feel that was a thorough answer, or do I need to say more? I don't know. I think I lost my track there.
No, I think that's pretty good. I think I went straight for the heart of the conversation. That's the problem. So so you went on something of a journey, and initially, as you say, you sort of saw this very kind of basic description of it, and it's like this function completely absent any kind of logic or rational agenda, and therefore something very much to move away from. Whatever this is, even if I am it, I don't want to be it. So
right. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those situations, and it's like when you describe introverted feeling in such a manner as it is often portrayed as, in that kind of low resolution terms you often find in blog posts, for example. Then I don't think anybody would really want to have such a shallow basic function, because that's just like, well, it's similar to the id in this instance within like psychology.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? That kind of that primal sense of who you are, that kind of the primal urges. And if it doesn't transcend that, then how is this supposed to be of equal value to a thinking function? But thankfully, this is not introverted feeling at all.
Right.
As we both know, it's like, how did you begin to understand there was more to introverted feeling, for example?
So part of it has definitely just been a matter of accumulating more experience, playing with these different frameworks more, meeting people who seem to fit the different type descriptions and engaging with them and picking their brains. And so I started to develop this understanding that you could kind of conceive of a dichotomy consisting of extroverted feeling as being very like outwardly directed and kind of a spectrum. It kind of fans out a little bit. And by being that way, it sacrifices something of like a depth. And so I've kind of been trying to conceive of, instead of seeing introverted feeling as very superficial and in that low resolution way, maybe it has more to do with like a connection with like the well springs of who you are. And
yes, exactly.
And so that has definitely been helpful. And so it's funny. I don't know. Here's a point that I wanted to bring up here, is that I do think that these dichotomies are kind of illusory in a way. Like perception and judgment both, I think, are based on this idea of contrast. So you can't like see something without a backdrop of something else, figure, foreground, that sort of thing. And so I think that like the cognitive functions in some way are built on this idea where we have to have a superficial understanding of difference, but maybe from some like enlightened, elevated viewpoint, they are the same thing, or they are part of like this organic thing that's moving. So
exactly.
Right. And so I have this notion that I've been kind of chewing on of like discovering introverted feeling through my introverted thinking, or like if you take anything far enough, it becomes its opposite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Describe that as the dip function within CPT.
Oh, dip function.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to hear more about that, but I'll keep going for now.
No, continue.
And so for me, I suppose that has been trying to formulate this like model and framework for how reality works. And in doing so, I'm encountering things like depth psychology and Jung's work, and I'm seeing that as being, that seems to like approximate how I think reality functions. And if you take that seriously, like, so there's like a logic, you can see like, if you do this and if you see that this makes sense, then ultimately, like I have developed an understanding that if I want to appreciate myself as like a holistic being and exist in the world with the fullness of what I would like to embody, then I have to focus on introverted feeling and make room for it.
Absolutely. I love it, man. That's such a good description of the value of introverted feeling and the process of gradually relating to its importance and gradually step by step, inch by inch, accessing a little bit more of that function from a position, in your case, which is quite natural to you. Because, yeah, fair enough, some ENTPs can just let introverted feeling kind of exist in a more unconscious state, but through accessing it as a dip function in your case, so, you know, rotating on your axis, having an SI dominant or TI dominant, for example, because, you know, codecs and lenses can rotate as well. But and then, you know, dipping into introverted feeling from this conscious point. Yeah, that's such a great way of activating it, for example. So,
well, yeah, I love that you I love that you mentioned introverted sensing as well. I feel like I've also tried to access it using my SI. So I'll touch on that in a bit, but I would love to hear more about what you're going to say.
Cool. Well, actually, like, I'd say you're further along in your introverted feeling journey than I am. Because, so sometimes, like, I engage my introverted feeling in a more kind of like a plethoric way. I sometimes bypass my introverted thinking entirely. So using an introverted intuition alongside introverted feeling. And this is actually like a very default state for a lot of INFJs across the world. And it was how I was when I was growing up, because as you know yourself, it takes a while to activate the conversion to auxiliary, or the tertiary function as described within other systems. And like until that point, you're bypassing that function to dip into the opposite orientation to your auxiliary as within MBTI, or the divergent auxiliary as within CPT. And so oftentimes I feel like myself going back to that previous state. So rather than accessing my introverted feeling from the standpoint of my introverted thinking, dipping into it, which I'm definitely going to start doing more of. You've sort of inspired me in that level. I tend to just sort of say, no thinking, I've had enough of this for now, I'm going to take a complete break from it. And then I'm just going to survey my emotions in this kind of like weird kaleidoscopic archetypal manner. But still falling significantly short of the kind of precision and the, you know, the dipping with SI of the INTJ. Sometimes the INTJ can experience a plethoric emotions, but also have that NISI dip, especially when they're more evolved. Whereas like the SI dip from my dominant function is for me a lot harder to engage when I'm bypassing my introverted thinking. So a lot of theory information thrown there, but that tends to be how I engage my introverted feeling.
I see.
Ordinarily, yeah. And that's why a lot of INFJs, when they're growing up, they're kind of like these dreamlike, kind of like ethereal, their landscapes are dreamlike and ethereal in nature. They tend to be quite wishy-washy, and they develop the conscientiousness later on. And generally that coincides with the development of the introverted thinking. And I think the fact that you can dip more easily, and it's more intuitive for you to do so, dipping into your introverted feeling, which would be me dipping into my, for example, extroverted thinking from my extroverted feeling, which is more natural for me to do, is because you're doing so from your authority function. You're doing so from your introverted thinking. And that's something that you're always going to be drawn towards. Whereas like introverted thinking in an INFJ, even when it's highly activated, it's still the conversion auxiliary, and it's always something that can be bypassed at the behest of, for example, the authority function, or the opposite orientation to the authority function introverted feeling in an INFJ. Theory. So.
I like it. I did want to speak a little bit to how I've attempted to use introverted sensing as well to kind of access my introverted feeling. And this is an idea that I originally encountered on a channel called NT Support. So it's like 4 different guys, INTJ, ENTJ, INTP, ENTP.
I think I've seen that, yes. Yeah. I haven't connected properly with the channel. I don't think I've watched anything properly, but I've seen something like that, yeah.
Yeah, they're really interesting. They haven't released a video now probably in 2 years, so I don't know if they're doing it anymore, but it was something that when I was initially using YouTube as a way of understanding this kind of information, it was one of the first channels I encountered, and
cool.
They had this notion of it's hard to explain, but like sliding into FI through SI. That's a weird metaphor. Probably could make that more robust. But
Yeah.
I guess in my own life, I see it. So if you think of your feelings or your values as something, as what matters, then to me it seems like you can investigate the catalog of your past experiences for various trends, and even if you don't consciously feel a sense of this deeply matters to me, then you're still acting out in the world in a particular way. You're still embodying pragmatically, like certain things matter to you more than other things. And so
Absolutely.
I think that by like engaging with my history, my own personal history, I can sometimes like turn on a light switch, and then suddenly like stumble upon something that is like nostalgic, and then I'm like suddenly more sentimental than I've been in like the past 10 years, you know?
Yeah.
So that's how I think about using SI for that. And then I've tried to be very, something that I'm wanting to do is like, this is a very weird thing to admit, but start a crying routine, because I very rarely
That's cool.
cry.
Yeah, I need to do more crying. Like I could definitely do with that in my life.
Yeah. And I have barely any clue how to do that, but I think that it might be beneficial for me to do it. And
That's awesome.
yeah, I have a box in my closet of like sentimental items, like things I've collected that remind me of people in particular moments.
Yeah.
And it's very easy, I think, for ENTPs to become kind of like disconnected from themselves as historical beings, like instead of like something that's existing in this fog of possibility. And so yeah, it's very helpful to like suddenly realize, oh, I've lived a particular life, I've encountered particular people, and it activates something in me that I don't even expect it to like look at an old photograph or to
So yeah, like just an external stimuli, because it's so potent, suddenly dragging a function out from the unconscious. Because as you were saying before, like introverted feeling, we all have introverted feeling, we all have values, we all have desires. It's just the consciousness of these desires which will fluctuate across individuals. But suddenly, like having an absence of conscious awareness of these values and desires and connections, especially those pertaining to the past, as you say, and then suddenly like having a floodgate open, that must be quite like a revelation-like experience.
Yeah, it can be, and I like the floodgate metaphor. It definitely feels like, as somebody who does live a little more like untethered, you know, somewhere up here, to be confronted with the reality of, oh, I'm a tiny mortal thing. Here's my life. It's like, it just like brings up so much stuff to the surface, and it allows me to access that.
Man, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like the way I'm trying to engage my FI a lot more at the moment, again through this kind of external relation, if you like, it's just kind of remembering to take a step back and just perceive what is currently, what I have and what I've accumulated. So it's definitely got a past tense orientation, but rather than reflecting on the past for its own sake, it's sort of like reflecting on the now as the accumulation of the past. And and when I do that, it's like I'm no longer chasing this constant kind of what's next, this kind of like NETE or this NITI, which is like my default state a lot of the time. I'm always thinking about, okay, where am I right now? Okay, forget about that. Where can I be in a few days? Where can I be in a year? Where can I be in 10 years? Exactly, projecting. And I'm doing that so often. It's an active will, and I even forget how to actually initiate this active will to just take a step back and say, well, actually I have all of these things. And then that suddenly like activates my limbic system. I'm like, actually, this is pretty cool. I'm suddenly like assigning values to things that actually are, and no longer chasing fantasies, no longer chasing these projections that of course I'm limbically attached to. But when I suddenly drag my limbic system back, drag my introverted feeling back from this introverted intuitive kind of kaleidoscopic self-transformative landscape, and suddenly I'm like, oh, actually what is pretty cool too.
Right, and
I'm actually happy to be here,
Right,
and
what is an accumulation. It's,
Exactly, yes. What is an accumulation, as you say.
You're living in the NI that you had foreseen 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe not perfectly,
like
but some variation of that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't always have to be like depressing necessarily, because for example, like going into like a bit of childhood ambitions. Like I used to want to be a video game composer. I was a massive geek growing up. Well, I'm still a geek and proud of it, but I don't game the same level I used to. I game recreationally every now and again if I've got a spare second just to chill out. But I used to game quite intensely, and I used to be really emotionally invested in all these various different fictional landscapes, for example. And I was also heavily invested in the music. Like my first introduction to music outside of the realm of pop and hip hop and whatnot was orchestral video game music. So suddenly this was like, and suddenly this was my main focus. This is something that I listened to time and time again to sort of escape this sometimes difficult external world. And it was sort of my little sanctum of, my MP3 player at the time of all these different video game tunes. So I was heavily invested into that. So that means I wanted to be a video game composer. And then I built this YouTube channel, this guitar channel thing, and I did quite well. And then I was like, okay, I don't want to be a video game composer anymore. I'm just going to continue playing video game music on my guitar. And sort of gradually become like an original composer, guitar player, band member thing. So it was a more contemporary musical pursuit. And then like before I knew it, I was like going into psychology. So that means like all my future projections in the past are sort of like, they haven't poofed, but they've definitely like, I accomplished like a level of them, and then I realized actually I want something else.
Right.
But now it's like I'm trying to find like a way to sort of like still reconcile that past projection of mine with this current projection I've got at the moment. Someone who's trying to help people reach out. And I realized like one way of doing so is the fact that musically I always wanted to help people, I always wanted to connect with people, and a lot of the music I do these days is actually in a kind of therapeutic setting, for example.
Right.
So yeah, it's a big component of me being a musician. So like maybe I'll try and integrate some music or something into CPT, but I'm not going to like obsess over that because I don't want to dilute what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, that was a very long-winded tale of how past introverted feeling projections don't reconcile currently with my own at the moment.
The main takeaway that I'm hearing is that there's not going to be an ENTP rap firing back at me.
Exactly. And as much as I loved your ENTP rap, actually I think it's because I loved your ENTP rap that I know I cannot do any better. So I mean, maybe I can provide a guitar accompaniment next time if you want to do a little music. Maybe we'll do something like that. But generally speaking, like it's difficult for me to integrate music, especially since, well, as you all know, as you know, Jeffrey, I'm not that much of a comedic channel. I don't really have that much light-hearted stuff. And I have a light-hearted side, as you know, obviously, but yeah, it's like I try and keep that outside of my channel because I'm always talking about this super serious theory thing all the time. So it's like the realm of comedy is an excellent realm to introduce a kind of a musical medium. And yeah, it's kind of a shame in some ways, but not in others, that I don't have that particular option for this channel. But
I think it's fine. It sounds like you were happy with the arrangement. I thought that a bit of reflection that you just did there was really beautiful. Like the notion of, so the visual metaphor that I was experiencing as you were talking about this experience of like wanting to do video game music, and then how your life is actually played out compared to that original vision. It's like consulting a compass. I don't know if I can quite nail this metaphor, but it's like this circumambulation kind of notion where you're getting closer, but you're kind of weaving in and out, and you don't really know where you're going initially. But once you get a little further along, you the North Star is like in a slightly different place, and you're always moving in the direction.
That's it. So,
but you're like, your perception is you're too far away from. You're too far away from what you need to be or what you're going to be right now to see it fully, but you see little glimmers of it, and you can kind of chase those glimmers, and then eventually you get a clearer picture of what you're going for, and that just continues until you're in the grave, man.
Until you're in the grave, that's it. What a beautiful metaphor. So, yeah, man, it's like... But it's like learning to reconcile both the limbic to the future and the limbic to the past. I think that allows us to cross-reference all of our different projections that we've encountered for our lives, and actually realize, so this is how it all relates, this is how it all adds up, and we can bring all these things into harmony. And we do away with this thing here, we do away with that thing there, we realize these things were superfluous to the to the core of what we wanted, and then we can find our dreams, we can find our soul ambitions. And so that's what I'm thinking, like
there's a parallel there
with both the lenses, and then we can find who we want to become. So man,
that is phenomenal. So do you think that So for my particular situation, how would I go about using NI to access FI, or is that something that wouldn't make as much sense for me? Would I be better off following some other path?
First of all, predominantly, it'll be much easier for an ENTP to activate introverted intuition in a conscious manner outside of the realm of people. As soon as you've got people around you, it's just going to be, this FE magnet thing. You're just going to be seeing all of this and then you interact with it. I mean, that's your dominant state. So it's not that you can't do it, but predominantly if you're trying to train your introverted intuition, introverted feeling, then you need to be absent people first and foremost. But then you need to detach yourself from the object, from the objective, from the introvert sensing, from the specific. And that's very difficult to do. That's the equivalent of me engaging with a room and then seeing how all of these components, these objective values, these tools, if you like, are aligning with one another. Right. What fits where? It's me taking a big picture overview and seeing where things relate to each other, but still trying to detach from the kind of more introvert feeling sense of aesthetics. So it's difficult because I need to see the room and then I need to say, well, where is this all logically fitting together? Is this accessible here, for example? So that'll be my extrovert thinking, extroverted intuition, and that'll be the equivalent of you activating your introverted intuition, introverted feeling. So, and I know I can do it. I've done it before, but I need to be, first of all, detached again, like yourself, from a social situation. And then I need to be sort of letting go of my need to internalize all forms of logic. And I think a first preliminary step of doing so is just accepting the unconscious part, the unconscious component of your introverted intuition, introverted feeling, accepting that it's sort of like it's vague, accepting that you're not really seeing the full picture and it's more of an experience than it is a perception. But I think it's that acceptance that can actually allow it to float to a higher level of consciousness. So as to whether or not, it'll ever be at the same level of consciousness as, say, your introvert sensing, introvert thinking dipping into introvert feeling, so activating your sensing from a more specific angle, which, relates to your nostalgia story and you introducing these, objects in order to, bring forth your introvert feeling. So to say whether or not it'll be as conscious as that, I don't know. This is still an early stage experiment, but I know that it can be a degree of consciousness, and I know that we can dip in, just as we can dip into another codec from one codec, because, going back to the continuums we've talked about, we can still dip into orientations as well. I can dip into extroverted intuition from introverted intuition. So it all adds up, and so there's no reason we can't access the degree of consciousness. Well, the extent to which we can completely master consciousness over something of the complete opposite to where we would normally be conscious, that remains to be seen. It's something of an experiment, but I know that we can to an extent. Yeah. And I know that we can use it unconsciously too. So even if you can't consciously tap into introverted intuition, introverted feeling, you can still tap into it, but you just have to accept the unconscious element. So two paths.
One thing that I'm realizing, and I was realizing as you were talking about wanting to compose video game music, is I think that a lot of my relationship to feeling as a general concept has occurred in the context of wanting to create things, like create tangible products that I can then share with other people. So I wanted to create video games whenever I was a kid.
That's it.
And I started playing things like The Legend of Zelda. I started playing Super Mario, and I also wanted to write stories. Like from a very early age, I was just fascinated by this notion that I could do exactly what I'm experiencing. I can create that experience for another person. And so a lot of my own emotional, I feel like when I was a kid, most of my emotional experience was like primarily anxiety based. And I didn't even I didn't experience it as an emotion per se, but more as like feeling alienated from my body and feeling like, what is this thing that I'm occupying and driving around in? I don't like it. And it's like being in a vehicle where you don't fully understand the controls. But so that being said, my own personal subjective sort of emotional experience wasn't really clear to me. But yeah, I was very interested in like creating things for other people and how can I do like a distillation of, like I was playing this game online with a friend of mine and I thought that it would be a good gift to like take the logic of it, convert the whole thing into a handbook for how to play the game, and then give that to him, and that would make him happy. Like, here, now you don't have to worry about puzzling it out and doing like the NT process. I've done that for you, and now you can play the game and just have a good time. And there was a lot of, like, early on, that was like how I related to emotions. They existed outside of me, but I could impact them, and I liked to impact them.
That's such an ENTP experience of what emotions are. It's this kind of this thing that you can see other people feeling, essentially, and so you can use what you are conscious of in order to construct something to forward your own social utility, which is extrovert intuition, extrovert feeling. So I'm going to give you this thing, so that means I can observe, being a lens dominant type, your social experience and feel valued, feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do. Yeah, exactly. And that's like, the ENTP is such like an empathic type. It's like, even from an early age, it's just like you're predisposed in so many ways. It's like, as long as you have a like remotely healthy childhood, for example, to help other people, to give other people an emotional experience, because it's a part of you connecting with what it means to be human in the first place. So like, even if we take a completely selfish perspective, you're still enhancing your own experience by absorbing the emotions of other people and knowing that you have caused this positive state. So like, you don't necessarily have to take a completely hyper empath perspective to recognize that the ENTP is set up naturally to be quite altruistic. So yeah, that was a cool example to reinforce that point. That's
awesome. I really like the notion of like affective empathy versus cognitive empathy, because I feel like personally, as I'm getting older, I feel more like actually like in my body, somatic empathy for people. But when I was younger, it was very, very cognitive, very cerebral, wanting to understand, wanting to model, since I didn't have that direct access to, like, being clearly like values and emotions were something that existed, but because I didn't have subjective access to them, if I wanted to understand them and create frameworks and models of them, I would have to do that impacting of the world, and then I could make more sense of it. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good.
And that's also like, it's even like just a way of testing your product as well, isn't it? It's like the social aspect. It's like, that's the validation for what you've created. So no matter what angle you take it from, you recognize that the social utility of the primary utility of the ENTP is social. The primary utility of the ENTP is to give other people a beneficial emotional experience. And when an ENTP departs from that path, and it isn't to say they can't be happy if they do so, but a lot of the time when they do so, they won't be happy. When they do so, they feel dissatisfied. They feel like they can't impact the world because they're not impacting the world in the way in which they are naturally predisposed towards. And it's just, even when an ENTP does go down a path whereby they don't necessarily need to, because you shouldn't limit yourself, obviously, impact the world in a social way, you still need to be tapping into that. You'll still need to be tapping into showing love and affection to other people. You'll still be doing that, even if it isn't your primary career. It's still a part, an integral part of who you are. And for other types need to do this more as well. Other types who aren't naturally predisposed to do so. You'd benefit from seeing the ENTP's creation of a product, for example, in order to enhance another person's social experience, and doing that yourself. I mean, I know as an INFJ, I suck at this. I'm really bad at enhancing another person's social experience outside of just abiding by social norms and etiquette, and outside the realm of just giving people cool advice. So it's like, seeing that done by another type, and I mean, the ENTP in particular has always inspired me to actually, help other people on that level. I don't always need to go to this core of another person's problem and then try and solve it from this, like, planting a seed that will only really bear fruit in 10 years' time. But which is a typical INFJ approach. But it's like, it's good to be able to just help people in the here and now as well. So that's awesome, man.
Right. That's funny. And then there's a dark side to it, though, clearly. Like, the thought of creating something that is entirely private and subjective is kind of horrifying for me. So my girlfriend is an INFP, and she will write poetry just as a means of, like, working through a situation and seeing where she lands on that situation. And for me, that just, like, I don't know, I would not want to touch that.
I can sort of relate to that. Like, I know INTPs as well, who like to create things, and just as a process, whether it's to connect with emotions or to connect with thinking, it's like, it's still a process of self-investigation. And
absolutely,
like the idea of of that not seeing the light of day, and it's like that effort, like for me, if I feel like somebody's put that amount of effort into something, I feel like the amount of effort which is required just to, like, give it to other people, now that you've created it, It's like you may as well invest that little bit of extra effort. It's like you may as well like
Yeah.
see what other people think of it as well, because now that it's served its primary
Right.
purpose and I recognise it's a cool purpose, you may as well apply that 5% extra energy just to sort of get it published or just upload
Yeah,
it somewhere. It's
to
like,
see what
let me
more-
see it, you
yeah.
know. I'm curious. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
I have been trying to think through that. I've been trying to recontextualize that idea, though, of creating something private for myself, and to see it as like a form of self-exploration, obviously. But it's like, what if I created a product for my future self, even if no one else ends up seeing it? Like, let me create something. Let me like create a dialogue with the other Jeffrey, the Jeffrey that's waiting on the other side of like the veil.
So fascinating. Oh, I'm loving this SIFI thing you got going on at the moment. It's great. I think I could definitely leave a note for myself in the future. Just just following that route. I think from this conversation, this is definitely something I've taken away. The value in utilizing external manifestations of who you are at this given point of time, and then reflecting upon that down the line, and using that as like a conduit into that kind of introverted sensing, introverted feeling state. So,
Right.
yeah, I'm going to try that for myself. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, I hope that works. Yeah.
It's cool.
Have you ever done anything like trying to explicitly articulate what your values are?
Yeah, so oftentimes my values, I'm only aware of them when they are breached. So it's like,
Oh, okay.
I can reflect upon situations in which I've become angry and have surprised myself, for example, when I've become angry. And then I realise, oh, actually, this is this value, whether it's right or wrong. And I can decide that now that I know about it. It's there, it's a part of me. This is actually and this must have been a big motivating factor. So yeah, like you, I definitely have this unconscious introverted feeling thing going on. It rises to the surface in certain circumstances, especially like one of like adversarial conflict and whatnot with other people. And yeah, in terms of like what my values are, I know what my TI values are, and I know that I've formed a kind of FI connection to them. I know that I'm deeply humanitarian. I know that I'm transhumanistic. I know that I'm moving towards a future in which we don't need certain things, but I'm also moving towards a future in which we value other things we haven't necessarily valued recently. And, you know, I do, but I say it in a very kind of detached, logical manner in which humanity will be better off if we do this. And my value in this sense is just this big kind of humanitarian, I want humanity to be better. But that's, I can't see it as a value just because like I benefit from humanity being better as well. So, you know, it's like, is it a value? But I have deeply held values. And if obviously the standard stuff, I have my deeply held like 8 level values, my primal values, like I cannot abide suffering, I cannot abide injustice, you know, the generic human things. Generally, most people are innately programmed to hate these things unless we've become deconditioned to them over time, for example. So, I'm a natural human being in the sense that I cannot abide injustice or, you know, suffering. If I see these things when they're no longer abstract concepts, I hate them, like any normal person would. But no, in terms of specific values and specific beliefs that are deeply attached to my limbic system, no, I put everything under this blanket of altruism and, you know, what I think it means to be a human being invested in both within and without. So, how about you?
Yeah, I guess another part of my FI journey has been, and I guess it's all sort of variations on a theme of dredging through the past and trying to extract something out that looks like a set of values or code. So I don't know if this is even, you mentioned that you have like your TI values, and maybe these values I'm about to share don't really have a limbic component to them as well. But there was a time when I just vomited out so many different words that I thought were interesting or important, you know, just spilling them on the page. And then I slowly whittled them down, like kind of pitting them against each other. Like, how do I feel about truth versus compassion? Okay. And then like whatever one became sort of like my values. And so there's an acronym, tabula, so as in like tabula rasa. So here's like the table upon which I'm building my life, or the tablet upon which I'm scribbling my life. So T, like truth, is very important to me. Seeking the truth, understanding things as they are, so I can actually work with the world as it is and impact things as they are.
That's cool. Yeah.
Artistry being kind of like broad, like I like to create things. I like to think about craft and sort of like technical elements of writing, for example. Like every time I'm writing not a novel. Well, I guess I've tried to write a novel a few different times.
Okay.
But anytime I'm writing a story or a novel, I'm always thinking like, how do I operate at the edge of what I've done before, like at the edge where I'm going to grow something that's more extreme, more challenging than what I've done before. Benevolence is really important to me, which I think ties into the NEFE kind of like, I don't want to say loop because that has a negative context, but like that cohesive firing,
that's better.
Unity, love, awareness. I mean, I feel like embarrassed even talking about these things, but that's but that's what I extracted out of like this battle of ideas and concepts.
Yeah, man, that's it's fascinating. You've definitely had a lot of deliberate FI exploration, far more than that I have. I definitely went through a phase of like what I describe as sort of ISFPing, kind of like seeing, well, what sort of archetype do I fit into? How do I want to be seen by people, and what do I want to embody in the future in particular? And I think like that was a major part of my identity construction when I was like developing a YouTube channel, being a musician, and it's like, so that was but it was just because it was very NI related rather than SI related in the way that you've been constructing your values. That it was very kind of like, well, I'm just going to be this thing, and I'm going to like try and add more to this thing over time and be like larger than life. I guess that was a value I wanted to I held dearly at the time, to kind of like live to my utmost. And now it's like, I'd say my value is similar to that, but I think I've also like recognized that everything is sort of a trade-off, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean loss is bad. Loss is a part of growth. So sort of like, that's one of my values now, realizing that like to have one thing, I must sacrifice another thing, but that doesn't mean that I didn't have that thing before. So that means it's still a part of me and I can have it again. But I'm going to reach out to that area. And that means maybe like if you see this dense kind of sphere, this is like where I am right now. This is the things I'm adding to my current identity. And then we have this kind of this outer shadow sphere, if you like. And this is comprised of the things I will be in the future, or I think I will be in the future, and the things I've been in the past. So it's still a part of who I am. And so this full-time musician thing is still a part of who I am. This aspiring video game composer, even, that's a part of who I am, because that isn't lost per se, but it's no longer within this sort of this dense inner sphere. So I think everything is a trade-off is like definitely one of my mottos at the moment, but it doesn't mean as blunt a kind of reality as it implies, or as it seems like at face value. Because the fact is, we're trading things in order to gain another thing, but we still have what we had in the past because it's in the past. We still have it, sort of. So that's me trying to reconcile myself with a more FI kind of way of thinking.
Interesting. I think it's very easy to overlook the fact that just because something isn't actively a part of your life in the moment, that it doesn't contribute either to who you have become or where you're going, or because even if you're like not focusing on music full time, as an example, like the desire, that strange attractor is still somewhere on the outside of the sphere, and it's not going to, what am I trying to say? It's not it's easy to forget that not everybody has these things on their own sphere. So even if you're not actively like chasing this one thing, it's still an orbit around you, and you can still return to it. I think I'm just regurgitating what you said.
No, it's cool, because that means it means we're on the same page. So, and I think you've described it in a more SI way as well, which is helpful for different. Because I was very wishy-washy NI, so you've grounded it in reality, if you like. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool.
It's not often that I hear that I've grounded something in reality, so that means a lot.
I think that's an overlooked strength of the ENTP, to be honest. But let's go back to the FI journey. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, let's say, in relation to FI? Like, where do you feel like, because we've explored like a lot of past relation to introverted feeling in your instance, but like, what's your future orientation?
Wow, that's an awesome question. This is going to be, I'm sort of spitballing here. I don't know if I want to put my ultimate stamp of approval on it, but this is my tentative my tentative vision. I suppose, like I mentioned before, the whole notion of having like a crying routine is something that I want to explore, and I think that by doing that, instead of these values, which I can kind of tentatively and occasionally access, I think that if I could make it more of like an embodied routine to focus on my emotions and my values, that's really where I'm aiming. Like, I want to just not just like understand them and appreciate them abstractly, but to have that limbic component, which is kind of fleeting. Like right now, I'm developing it's a very gradual development, but I'm developing a sense that, if I listen to like this particular song, I can probably get like at least a tear rolling down my cheek. Or if I read this one book that was really important to me, I can. And so I'm just trying to find methods of engaging that. Some people might say, why would you want to do that? I say, why not? Life is a weird experiment. I want to explore these different angles and see if something that I don't expect about myself emerges as a result.
Totally, man. And that's a good way of like, I touched on in like one of my INFJ videos, the fact that like extroverted feelings in general, we kind of try to elicit emotional responses within ourselves by using external mediums. We tend to manifest our own emotions in reality, whether through like a composition, or we tend to rely on things which symbolize emotional value to us, for example, like a song in your case, in order to draw out emotions. And once these emotions are being expressed, then it's like more kind of, we're extroverted feeling our own emotions. We're perceiving our own emotions, but they're being expressed externally, and that means we know we're feeling this certain way. So that means you can use extrovert feeling in order to monitor your own emotions in that sense. It's quite interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, even if you're not directly communicating with your introverted feeling, it doesn't mean you can't know what's going on. You just have to use these kind of external mediums in order to draw out these emotions from yourself. And so like being willing to do that and being brave enough to do that, and to go where no one's gone before, if you like, it's like it's very important. Yeah.
So one final thing that I'm interested in is this idea that, so I recently read a book called, I think, Voice Dialogue. It's a manual about kind of treating the different parts of your psyche as discrete units or individuals, and like, let me do this active imagination process where I pretend to be my introverted feeling. And so I think that is also something that I'm going to try to actively do. Like, and that's something that I could even turn into a skit for my YouTube channel, where it's like, here's my, my extroverted intuitions talking to this weird stranger that rarely shows up to the party. And then maybe even convert all of these different tools that I've tried to use into something that other people can use, because I've only talked about introverted feeling maybe once or twice on my channel. But to like give people resources or ways of like trying to access this as well. I'm definitely going to be reading your book to see if it sparks anything or like inspires me to try another technique. So
sweet.
That's the future. Like trying a few more things to feel it in a more limbic, embodied sense, and exploring a few more techniques, and then sharing the bounty with the world
definitely. There we go. The social
ENTPs who are alienated.
Exactly. I love it. No, that's incredible, man. I'm looking forward to monitoring your own introverted feeling journey. And because like, as someone like with their own system, like, which is geared predominantly towards like self-development, it's like seeing the different strategies, like seeing people such as yourself like investigate different avenues through which functions can be drawn out or interacted with without necessarily even rendering them conscious, is just super, super important. And it's like, I need all the information I can get, because I have theoretical ways of explaining how information comes. It's like, but the example part of it, like the action part of it, this is still like the next stage of CPT. This is still something I'm constructing. So it's so fascinating to hear like different avenues through which, we can use things outside of ourselves in order to become more in touch with parts of ourselves. So this is something I'm also much more interested in. It's been really, really great hearing your own journey of introverted feeling.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm sure that it's heartening to have like this theory where I'm probably describing certain things that you can explain theoretically, and it's like, oh, okay, this is actually playing out.
Yeah.
Even though I would never be able to use the same terminology to account for it, I think that would be, as somebody who does have like a theoretical side, that would be very heartening to me, you know.
Sweet. Definitely, man. Cool. Well, I really, really enjoyed that conversation, man. Definitely go over to Jeffrey's channel if you haven't already. He's got like really diverse and interesting content. He's got like a really quirky comedic side, which I definitely recommend checking it out. But he's also got like this theoretical side that you've seen demonstrated in this video as well. So definitely head over to Auto Alchemy. And yeah, if there's anything else you want to plug while you're here, or
that's it.
That's it. Cool. Well, thank you all for watching, and I'll speak to you next time. And thank you again for Jeffrey. Thank you again to Jeffrey for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye, guys.
Take care.